Do we feel like there's this strong need to have a generalized AI? Is that just because we're trying to, I hate to say like be godlike, but like almost like be godlike where we can create a being like ourselves? And, I don't know if where that comes from.
Welcome to the Conversations on Applied AI podcast, where Justin Grammens and the team at Emerging Technologies North talk with experts in the fields of artificial intelligence and deep learning. In each episode, we cut through the hype and dive into how these technologies are being applied to real-world problems today. We hope that you find this episode educational and applicable to your industry, and connect with us to learn more about our organization at AppliedAI.MN. Enjoy.
Welcome, everyone, to the Conversations on Applied AI podcast. Today we have Dave Mathais. Dave is a data and product coach and is the co-founder at Beyond the Data, an organization that is helping individuals and organizations move beyond the status quo by coaching and training teams to deliver amazing insights, products, and services. He is also the host of the Data Able podcast, a podcast that covers inspiring stories from real change agents, data champions, product champions, and data-driven leaders. Finally, Dave has been very involved in the local analytics community by being on the board of Mini Analytics and seems to always be out in the community running conferences, meetup groups, and other events. Thanks, Dave, for taking the time to talk today.
Great to be here.
Say, you and I have talked a lot in the past. We've been in this sort of tech community, and I know a little bit about your background, but maybe you'd be interested in sharing a little bit about what you've been working on and maybe the overall trajectory of your career.
Yeah, so all over the place is so somewhat like yourself, right? So
Yeah.
I consider myself in the tech community. Also, I also am in so many other communities that I feel like I don't know where I belong on whichever day. But like I tell people, I feel I'm a recovering chemist and a recovering attorney that became a product person that now has a couple of different entrepreneurial ventures, more geared towards the intersection of data and analytics as certainly one of them, but also around customer experience, employee experience, and certainly that is a core component, along with product strategy and product alignment, things like that. Sort of that intersection of those things are really where I play a lot. Certainly some of those things that I do, just like yourself over the years, we like being part of a community. One of the parts of being part of a community is bringing people together. Obviously, we're in these COVID times, we have a little less of the in-person communities. But at the same time, been a part of things like Mini Analytics, and which is a big analytics org here in town. We'll also lead the product camp here in town, the product camp Twin Cities. I've started Customer Focus North a few years ago.
Yeah.
So some different angles from an event side, and of course the meetups. You and I both run different meetups over the years, and right now I lead both the Data Viz meetup here in town and also the Data Fluency meetup here in town. But then also participate in many meetups like yourself.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, no, the Data Viz meetup is awesome, and I'll be sure to include links to all these meetups and organizations and stuff in the notes for the episode. And you're also an entrepreneur, right? So you've started your own company focused on data storytelling, or how would you?
Yeah, I mean, certainly data storytelling is a part of it, but I would say it's more the digital and analytics adoption. Data visualization, data storytelling is a small part of that whole adoption effort. So if you're going to harness data more in your organization, everything from, where do I start and how am I going to start approaching leveraging analytics and certainly like self-service analytics platforms like Tableaus or Power BIs or those types of platforms are certainly very popular. But then there's also efforts around, are you really looking to go down the very much the data science-y route? And I say data science because I think there's these different terms that we use in different aspects, and people get very sensitive of this means this and that means that. And at the same time, if you're going to be more sophisticated and trying to build your own algorithms, your own models at a more sophisticated level, as opposed to repurposing more of what other people have done and doing slight tweaks to things, or are you simply just trying to basically be more of a reporting type of system of data that you have so that you can understand, what happened, maybe dive into why it happened, but you may not be building up those predictive models or prescriptive models that would help predict in the future, so it's sort of, we work in different areas with organizations.
That's awesome. So do you find, just to kind of dive in a little deeper, I guess, are you finding that you're having to guide them through this journey sometimes, or you guys come in and they are very much like, we need to do this, this, and this?
Mm-hmm.
How do those typically go, or is it a little bit of both?
Yeah, so bigger organizations have very experienced teams. They have a lot of great talent. But when it gets to smaller organizations, it tends to need more of that guidance along that effort, whether they're just starting a route or whether they tried going down a route and now they're trying to readjust.
Right.
Which oftentimes happens. Oftentimes, you hopefully are learning from your mistakes. That we all hopefully learn from our mistakes. And I say instead of fail fast, you want to learn fast. And so, how do you learn fast and update and really start getting better value out of the data that you have?
Good. Well, the one question I've been asking a lot of people that come on the show is sort of, how do you define AI?
Mhm.
I'm not sure if you've thought much about it, but I'm just kind of always curious to hear what people say when I say, if you could give it a quick elevator pitch, say, I don't know nothing about technology, nothing about the field. And I say, hey, how would, I've heard this AI term. How would you define it, Dave?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question, and certainly a question that brings up a lot of different responses. Like you say, it's interesting. So, like, there's the terminologies AI, or I think machine learning has a little bit more agreed upon type of or more similar type of response
Hmm.
you get when you ask people machine learning versus data science, right? I think that a response gets a pretty broad, similar to AI, gets a pretty broad level of different responses. Let's just say this definition is one that they basically use the machine learning type of definition as AI definition, which is basically anything that can program or like sort of write its own code. Like I think that's a good one for machine learning in the sense that it learns from itself. But I think as soon as you start saying AI there, I think AI can be other things that can mimic human side in other capacities, and that's why I do actually think RPA is not a bad, because in essence you're trying to use a way of saying, hey, the human is doing this normally. They normally grab data from the spreadsheet.
Yep.
They then put in the email or they put in the database or they whatever. And that's mimicking what humans do.
Yeah, totally. And just mimicking what humans do I don't know. I feel like it's not very intelligent,
No.
right? So yes, it is artificial, but it is not very intelligent. So what you really want to try and build is a system that gets better over time, that can optimize itself.
Yeah.
And this generalized versus specialized learning, yeah, the stuff that Andrew Ng was sort of talking about is like, we're not at a generalized level right now.
No.
But I do think it's either chess or Go or like one of those things where I was reading a book on this where it taught itself, right? It basically figured out the rules based, and it wasn't human programmed. It observed
Yes.
all these various combinations and found out how it won. And what was fascinating was the book had mentioned that over the course of entire time, people have been trying to figure out chess and master it, and this thing figured it out and learned it in 4 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was fascinating, right? So how can you take that? And that's it's very rules based, so it's very simple to follow. But how can you
Yes.
take that and build it into something that is all of a sudden this car can learn how to drive?
Mm-hmm.
For example, from an infant, basically doesn't know anything, and 4 hours later now it's basically racing around the track at 200 miles an hour.
Yeah, so like you were saying that there is so many options in life in general, but there's so few in actually a game. When we actually think of how many choices you get to make, whether it's chess or whether it's Go or whatever it is, it's like, okay, you have a stone to place on a Go board and you have X amount of squares. And yes, you place your first one where your starting point is, and then you see where there is. But there's just there is a calculatable type of problem where you can calculate all different outcomes and in essence, can do that, as opposed to saying, okay, if I'm using any type of hand gesture and I have a bunch of different settings behind me, I could be outside in a self-driving car that, so how do I understand that person means this or is doing this, or like somebody is hurt and they're trying to flag down the car, or they could be trying to point to something, or they could be a blind person that's, all these different aspects that become almost an unprocessable amount. And so
Sure.
how do you make the best guesses, best calculations, so that you can, and also have a level of safety as a pedestrian that's out there. And that's really, it gets to the question of problems where you can like literally do the math and calculate everything, versus there's going to be a strong level of unpredictability that we can't calculate out all the options
Yeah.
and decide on. So how do we make decisions off that? And I think the better we get at that, the more we can move along that, and the more that we don't just have a computer system that is focused on just one task, but it's able to do like many, many different tasks. The more that gets people at least feeling like it's more generalized. But of course, to really get to that generalized level, you think of all the immense amount of things that we do as humans on a daily basis, right? So
Right, yeah. Do you believe we'll get to that level generalized AI at some point?
I don't know. I mean, I always like to think everything is
It's possible.
possible at some point. But I think in my lifetime, no. I mean, I think certainly not in my lifetime. Now, I do know I was at a conference, I don't know, a couple of years ago, and I remember the gentleman talking about cell phones and just about computing power, and he was giving the idea of computing power and where things are at when you add up all the computing power around the world and how many brains worth of computing power there was, like not storage, mental storage, but like just the ability to compute.
Okay.
Because there's always like the storage and the compute end, right?
Right.
And and I think he said, and I of course I'm probably gonna quote the number wrong, but it was roughly, I think by 2050, estimating that there was about 45 brains worth of compute power in a cell phone like size device.
Wow.
Well, now I think it was somewhere like, I think if we took all the computers in the world, or this is like a couple of years ago, all the computers in the world, I think it was in the single digits or maybe in the teens of computing power in the whole world. And so then if you're able to like say, okay, well, I have 45 human brains worth of computing power, and of course, like, doesn't mean that, as we know, like a computer can do certain tasks way better than a computer with just a lot less processing power. It's just really good at doing those small repetitive tasks. That doesn't mean that it doesn't take all of our brain power to do some of those things. But at least if you think in theory that we need to at least have the same or more compute power in a system to mimic, to have generalized AI, along with the storage in that system. And that the storage is already at that level where I think we're probably not that. I don't know what the current stats on storage are, but the storage seems to be more advanced than on the
compute side.
Yeah.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I'm not sure if you read much on neural nets or know about that, and I'll probably get the stat wrong. In fact, I won't probably wouldn't quote the stat per se, but it was just phenomenal the amount of synapses we have in our brain
Mhm.
and all the connections that even the most powerful computers, at least certainly not in your hand, but there is a lot going on in your brain that we still have yet to understand.
Yes.
Right. And so we've tried to mimic it, I think, with a lot of
Mhm.
these mapping the brain into a neural network and figuring out, yes, it works in a lot of these cases, but there's things we still don't know about the human brain.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've just scratched the surface of, and there's a lot of things we still can't explain. So
Mhm.
I guess I'm kind of with you in that if we can't even explain the human brain 100% today, how can we say then that we're going to build a machine to replicate it in some ways?
Yeah, I think the challenge, of course, as is, I think, people 100 years ago, and would they have said where we are today,
True.
they would have never imagined many of the things here. So that's where part of me just says and the advancements, especially in the computing and all these, even though obviously like the term artificial intelligence and all those things were coined, I think, in the 50s, that it's not that these things just sometimes take a while to develop, and I think even 20 years ago we wouldn't have thought for the ability to speech recognition and facial recognition and all these other types of things that we have at a very accessible level right now. So it'll be interesting to see what we can do. I mean, there's obviously a lot of fear on the generalized AI realm, but do we feel like there's this strong need to have a generalized AI? Is that just because we're trying to, I hate to say like be godlike, but like almost like be godlike, where we can sort of create a being like ourselves, and I don't know if that where that comes from.
It's awesome you mentioned being godlike. I'm not sure if you read the book called *Sapiens*.
Yes.
Yeah, and his second book, I'm going to mispronounce his name, but he has a second book called Homo Deus.
Yes, I had the audiobook for that. I have not finished that one, to be honest. Maybe a third of the way through.
Okay, well, it just fits very much in line with sort of what you were talking about. And for anybody listening to this, if you haven't read *Sapiens*, *Homo Deus*, and then he's got a third one out called 23 something for the 21st century. Really fascinating book.
Okay, that's a good one too.
Yeah, it's really good. But in the second book, that's what the whole point is basically, we've evolved from apes, and now we're at the current state where we're at right now. And a lot of the questions is how come we got so far as we did? How come we were blessed with all these things? Like, how come our brains evolved a certain way? How come civilization and culture ended up coming together to where we are today? And then really about like, we are really pushing the envelope now and trying to become gods. And in a lot of ways, we rewind the clock back, hundreds of years ago, a storm would happen, a volcano would erupt, and people would point at it and say the gods didn't like us. Over time, science has proven that there's not really these deities that are that are aiming to hurt humans and civilization. And now we're at the point of right now with human genomes, we're basically, resplicing and redoing stuff. We're going to the moon. We're going to go to Mars. I mean, you see all the stuff that's going on where we're basically rewriting the future. And, honestly, in a lot of ways, where if we didn't have this technology, we would have just been apes for the rest of time. And his book, I mean, obviously, as you've been reading it, it's not really a point of scaring people. He's really a historian, but it's really, the fact of the matter is like we're doing stuff that mankind has never done before.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lot of biological, but it's also a lot of AI. I mean, it's a lot of the things with regards to mind melding, right? There's stuff going on where I move my hand and it goes through my brain and it goes through the internet and it goes to you, Dave, and you move your hand, right? There's a lot of really interesting things where they're crossing the bridge between, and I guess in some ways, the more I'm sort of thinking about this is thinking about AI and its bridge into biology, because that's where it can have a huge impact.
Yeah, I mean, I think biology is another field where we're really at the infancy stage of really understanding a lot of these things. And so I guess the question is, and certainly I think while I'm no expert in the field of AI and being used in whether it's genetics or whether it's biology or any of those things, it does seem like there's at least a lot of folks in those spaces that see a lot of opportunities in those. And I guess the question is again, like, what is our purpose for using it in those spaces? Are we using it from a motivation just to make lives better, reduce poverty, reduce climate change, those types of things, where we want to make the world a certain way, or are we trying to just recreate different type of ourselves? In Japan, I forgot the statistics. I mean, there's a higher level of robotics in Japan than there are in the United States. And I forgot how many thousands of robots, but there were so many thousands of robots that were companion robots to people, as opposed to basically they were surrogates for from a relationship perspective, and like having, that relationship. And I think of, I forgot, I think it was like Big Bang Theory or one of those, Big Bang Theory, where one of the characters sort of like almost fell in love with Siri on the phone, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what are we trying to satisfy with this, with artificial intelligence is a big question.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think humans are just curious creatures, and I think, a century ago you'd say, why would you go to the moon? And I think in a lot of ways we're just curious to do that. So sometimes we just build things just for the sake of building them, I think, just to explore. But yeah, and falling in love with the Siri, there was I have seen companion pets, basically people that have Alzheimer's or are, in advanced age, they actually have, and it's more of an IoT device in like a lot of ways. But yeah, it's a pet that they can deal with and talk to. It'll talk back, and it's like their own little companion. And maybe that's what you're getting at, where we can use electronics with basically intelligence, I guess, to keep them happy.
Yeah, and I think there was even a certain physical aspect and other things too, which is just trying to have an overall, like, what are the things that are part of a relationship, so I think it is interesting because folks of our generation, Data, was a character in Star Trek in Next Generation, and he was always trying to be more human, right? I mean, trying to mimic humans. And of course, there's also a lot of those negatives of certain human qualities, anger, rage, other things that are not necessarily great qualities when they come out often. So, are we trying to create better beings than ourselves where we see flaws? Are we trying to just recreate ourselves? Are we trying to, what are we trying to do? Another movie that I like in that sort of sci-fi space is Ex Machina. I think that's how you pronounce it.
Yep.
And I think that's they're trying to create the generalized AI. That one's obviously a darker view of things, but
yeah. What was the one movie where the guy, I want to say it was called like Her or something like, or maybe it wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. I mean, as we're thinking of like a thing like voice is become a bigger thing, right? Like voice technologies, like whether it's a Siri or Alexa or Google Assistants or things like that, right? And where they started really becoming much more popular, part of it was, how good the language sounded from the device itself. But at the same time, how do we treat that voice? Do we treat it as another person where we're asking a question or we're sort of having a conversation, or are we, is our behavior just like Google search, where you would just, hey, tell me this now, and I want it quick as possible. And so it is interesting how people interact with those types of devices as a proxy of, where this might go.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Because voice can be very transformational in a lot of ways. People had thought that radio was going to die off because it wasn't as interface. There wasn't a lot of visualization cues, but radio is just as powerful now, it feels like, as it is ever.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think podcasts are another element of it. I mean, we're still humans. We still have the same senses. I mean, people like to think we're evolved and we're so much different than we were even thousands of years ago. I would tell people we're pretty much the same, right? I mean, we have a little more legacy knowledge that we get to start with. We have different technologies that we get, more tools that we get to start with and access. But we're the same genes. We're the same. Our systems work the same. We're so susceptible to viruses and to other things like that out there. So if we're not that different, and certainly one from a sensory perspective, sound or taste or those types of things are really strong emotional cues that we take in. And why I think podcasting has done so well is because voice is one of the more intimate, senses for us to, hear somebody's voice and very distinct.
Sure, definitely. Well, I want to bring it back a little bit to data, I guess.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
We've
I know
been,
we're
we've
getting
been, we've been,
philosophical
we've been
here.
going well, which is great. No, man, I love these conversations to go wherever they're going to go. And you mentioned about voice, and you mentioned about, I mean, we touched a little bit on the beginning around sort of storytelling. It feels like at the end of the day, you've got this ocean of data, and what you've been doing in your career, at least most recently, is sort of helping businesses make decisions on it, but then also maybe explain it better.
And also have people stronger at being able to do that themselves, right? Like we do a lot of stuff in the education space and a lot of, teaching people how to fish as opposed to just doing the fishing, which is, I think, a core thing. And I think I would like to see more effort spent like that. I think part of it's just the nature of we're always reacting to things. And I think, how do you take a step back, you be more strategic and say, where do we want to go and what does it take to get there? It's easier said than done for organizations around because there's a lot of expectations. And I think Andrew Ng, we were talking about before, I think he does a good job for education wise, his AI for everyone. If you haven't taken that as a person that's newer to this space, definitely recommend you take that on Coursera, AI for everyone.
Okay.
And it does a good job of really laying it down at a, like, I think at a very basic level. And of course he goes into some of those concepts with generalized versus, specialized AI and all those types of things. But just even thinking about what things is this type of stuff good at, or what is it not good at? When you talk about artificial intelligence, is like, yes, there's certainly a big technical aspect, and you certainly, if you're going to do neural nets, you need a lot of data generally. I mean, generally speaking, not all the time, but oftentimes you'll need a fair amount of data. And so there's certainly that aspect, but there's also a huge aspect of just understanding the domain and picking the right types of problems to go after, no matter what you're doing, and really finding value. I mean, even the idea of like creating dashboards, like you can create a ton of dashboards, but are those dashboards used, and are people actually taking action on those things? Are those actions what you expected those to be? And how do you sort of decompress that stuff from the start to minimize, again, learning fast as opposed to failing fast? How do you quickly say, okay, wait a sec, we built this, this isn't getting the action that we thought, we need to scrap this and get something else out there? Because you can't just stick 100 dashboards in front of an average person and expect that they're going to be able to, just like you can't, say, hey, these are the 100 metrics that you're going to be judged by. They won't know what they're going to, like, what matters, right? We're people. So, how do, each individual is going to say, okay, what's important to me from an incentives perspective as an organization? How am I going to be judged? Whether you're in government, whether you're a nonprofit, whether you're a for-profit you're working in. And so, and even in your own life, like, I think of one of the better things out there from a using a combination of, they use data visualization, but just even giving good insights, is Fitbit. Not just because it does a good job of using good visualizations and good practices like that, but it also gives good insights and thinking about, okay, here, what are the things that are important to me? Here's some insights, like, okay, you're on average sleeping this much after you've worked out like this. Like, have you thought of doing this? Like, and giving people those actual insights, and just thinking of, like, whatever you're doing with data, taking a step back and say, okay, what are we trying to do? Like, why are we collecting this? What are we hoping to get out of this? And how do we get people to help us unleash that value. And while it sounds simple sometimes for people, like, oh yeah, we're just going to collect all this data, we're going to throw it into a machine learning model, and it's going to tell us the answer. Like it's not how it works. And so, really taking a step back at the early stages of playing, and it's no different, to be honest, than a lot of things. Like the more you can, at the upfront perspective, start thinking about these things, start asking the questions. I like what Amazon, they do the whole practice of saying, okay, I write the press release at the beginning,
Absolutely.
thought about it and at first, and you're trying to really figure out, how do I unwrap that problem?
Phenomenal. Yeah, totally true. I completely agree. Kind of people, they get so lost they don't see the forest through the trees in some ways, right? So they're losing aspect of the big picture, and maybe that's a lot of what your current consulting work is keeping them focused on what the end goal is.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the end goal is and partly it's just helping people also be better at thinking about that in themselves, like and helping technical people be better people to work with the business side, and vice versa, and how the business people can have enough technical aptitude. I mean, because there is a need for both sides of folks, and some people will say, well, we'll hire translators is a more popular term that's been used, like data translators and HBR, and some of those have talked about that. There's also you can have technical people that can, understand the domain and have the right ability to interact and do that. Certainly that doesn't work for everybody, and some people are going to be better at that than others. I do think, though, that business people should also be asked to have some basic knowledge around some of these things that are important around the technology. And that's why, product teams and other things always encouraged to say, okay, you should understand you're going to be working with developers. Have you taken a programming course before? Not that you need to be the programmer, but you should at least understand programming, understand some of the challenges, understand that things aren't as easy as they seem. Just like what kind of things have you done in the user experience space or other things. So that's for a product manager. But if you're a finance person, and who are your stakeholders that you work with, and have you sat in their shoes a little bit and had some exposure to what they've been faced with, that you can better relate to them.
That's great. Kind of makes you think about the value of a liberal arts degree in some ways, which is what I did, sort of getting multiple perspectives. So, well, I want to give enough time here for you to promote your contacts. How do people get a hold of you? I know you have a podcast, of course, as well. If you want to mention any of that, how do people look you up online and find you and maybe connect with you?
Yeah, the website is gobeyondthedata.com. You can also just connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm not on social media that much, but the platform I'm on the most is LinkedIn. And to be honest, I'm really not on any of the others anymore. So I'm Dave Mathais 1 on LinkedIn, after the linkedin.com/in/Dave Mathais 1. Feel free to reach out. I do a fair amount of virtual coffees. I've been trying to do more of that now with COVID. I've been interacting with people, trying to help, especially folks younger in their career. So if you're a person that's looking to get into this, make a career switch, or looking to, accelerate your career, I'd love to just grab a coffee with you virtually, and we can chat. And like I say, there's a lot of opportunities out there. I think there's a lot more opportunities for folks that may have some strong data skills, but also have those other skills too. So thinking about how you can be more of a blended person is good.
Well, cool. Is there anything else you wanted to finish off?
No, I appreciate as always, Justin. Great to see you, despite these interesting times that we're in nowadays. But no, appreciate being on today.
For sure, Dave. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
You've listened to another episode of the Conversations on Applied AI podcast. We hope you are eager to learn more about applying artificial intelligence and deep learning within your organization. You can visit us at AppliedAI.MN to keep up to date on our events and connect with our amazing community. Please don't hesitate to reach out to Justin at AppliedAI.MN if you are interested in participating in a future episode. Thank you for listening.